President Trump tells our Ouija Jang the war with Iran is, quote, very complete, pretty much. And the decision when to wrap it up is, quote, all in my mind, nobody else's. My interview for 60 Minutes with Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, war objectives, finding nuclear material inside Iran, what surrender might look like, and regime change. A federal criminal complaint accuses two suspects of trying to detonate two homemade bombs near New York Mayor Zohran Mamdani's residence Saturday. Prosecutors allege the suspects acted in the name of ISIS. Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Welcome to the Takeout. The president is meeting with House Republicans to go over strategies for the midterm elections because they're coming. There's a couple of things on House Republicans' minds. Among them, the average price of a gallon of gas has risen 50 cents in 8 days. Also, airport security lines are growing noticeably longer as staff shortages mount because TSA employees continue to work without pay. And that is a consequence of a standoff here in Washington over funding for the Department of Homeland Security. Iran has selected a new supreme leader, with the Israeli and U.S. governments expressing opposition that might again manifest in missile attacks, as was the case with Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader killed when this war began. That war continues with missiles fired and drones launched, though the numbers of munitions and damage inflicted on either side, well, that's a bit hard to track with complete confidence and accuracy. And in that regard, there is mounting visual evidence a U.S. Tomahawk missile might have been responsible for deaths at a girls' school in southern Iran. That missile may well have been targeted based on dated intelligence for what the U.S. thought was a military installation. All this is a preliminary estimate of currently available information. On Friday, I spoke with Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth for last night's 60 Minutes broadcast and asked about that bombing. Please take a listen. Have you made any conclusions about whether or not the United States, inadvertently or not, was involved in any military strike at that school?
Well, we're still investigating, and that's where I'll leave it today. But what I will emphasize to you and to the world is that unlike our adversaries, the Iranians, we never target civilians.
There was a report late in the week from two officials that it was likely U.S. involvement. Is that report false?
I've already said we're investigating.
If you could tell the American public it definitively was not us, you would tell us, wouldn't you?
I would say that it's being investigated, which is the only answer I'm prepared to give.
You said this is not a regime change war, but the regime has changed. That's obvious. Can you square the two?
Sure.
Go ahead.
I meant what I said. It's not a regime change war in the conventional George W. Bush context of hundreds of thousands of troops. I mean, in Afghanistan, what I watched as a young captain was Americans thinking we were going to remake a society that was basically biblical times with AK-47s and cell phones. The hubris of we're going to take Afghanistan and turn it into a Jeffersonian democracy by building Western-style forces and Western-style institutions. It was never going to work, and I saw it and watched it play out. And it doesn't dispel the courage of the Americans who fought there, who I know there. But this is not a remaking of the Iranian society from an American perspective. We tried that. The American people have rejected that. President Trump called those wars dumb, and we're not fighting that way.
President Trump also said this week he would like to protect some of the people who he would like to come to power in Iran. Is that a new mission for your department?
No.
How would you protect people that are inside the country that he might think could rise to the level of leadership there?
Well, the best way to protect them is what we're doing right now. What you see right now between American efforts and Israeli efforts is a generational opportunity for the people of Iran.
For more on the region and the war, we turn to our Matt Gutman in Tel Aviv. Matt?
Hey, Major, you know, something struck me about your interview with Secretary Hegseth, and that was that you asked, if you knew definitively, would you tell us about the school strike in Iran? The Israelis were basically telling us on the first day. Now, what we understand from this school strike is that it happened in the very opening hours of the war. Our partners at the BBC did video verification of a missile that appeared to hit that area. Obviously, I think that it is clear that there was not a plan to strike a girls' school and kill over 175 children. There's also a question about the proximity of that girls' school to that IRGC base. That's the sort of the regime military command. Why would it be so close? But this is what happens. There are military installations next to civilian installations everywhere across the Middle East, including here in Israel. So as we are learning more, we are learning that the U.S. was likely involved, and the Israelis were telling us essentially from the start that they hadn't operated in that area at all. So it is becoming clear at what point the U.S. actually takes responsibility is uncertain. But also, I think it is notable to some degree that we haven't seen more such attacks that have killed civilians on large scale as well. I think that is surprising given the vast number of airstrikes, the enormous number of ordnance dropped, and explosive power used against Iran over the past 8 days, Major.
Matt, I made reference to the new supreme leader chosen in Iran. What do we know?
Not that much. He's a bit of a cipher. He had operated in the shadows. He did not have a very public profile, to say the least. He was known to be extraordinarily loyal, or is known to be extraordinarily loyal to the regime, to the Revolutionary Guards, and obviously to his father. He was sort of a backdoor operator who worked with the security services and intelligence, and it is a very clear sign from the regime of continuity, of defiance, of saying we are not backing down, we are staying the course, and not just staying the course in terms of general leadership and direction, but staying within the family. So a very clear message. It's unclear if the U.S. is going to be working with him. One of the things that Israeli officials on the ground told me as recently as yesterday is that the next Ayatollah, if it is someone like Mojtaba Khamenei, is likely not going to survive for long. I was told that that is a very, very high-risk job and that Israel and the U.S. are watching. Same thing for the IRGC. They are clearly intending to at least try to go after some of these senior figures. And this is by no means over in terms of targeting those leaders, Major.
Last question, Matt, and we talk about tempo, not because we're fascinated by how many missiles are flying or not, but just trying to get the audience who's not there a sense of what it is like hour to hour as maybe compared to last week. So in your own words, describe what you see and what differences, if any, exist this week that didn't exist last week.
I think the greatest difference, in fact, Major, is not necessarily what we have seen between the past 8 days, but what we saw in the previous war in June. There were massive missiles that came down that destroyed entire apartment blocks. We haven't seen much of that, a couple of those. What Iran seems to be doing, and the tactic that it appears to be using right now, is using cluster munitions that essentially release. They have a big warhead, and inside that warhead are dozens of bomblets. They weigh about 40 pounds each, the explosives, about 5-6 pounds in them. They flutter down, and what they're able to do is defeat Israel's air defenses by deploying high up in the atmosphere, 7-8 miles above, before they can be intercepted. And they release those bomblets, and it strikes terror in the population. The devastation in terms of raw explosive power is far less, but it does mean that Israelis have to stay hunkered down for longer. But I am struck by the difference of what people in Tel Aviv are experiencing and what people in Tehran are experiencing. They don't have shelters. There are no real air defenses there. And I know that they aren't being targeted, but I can also imagine the constant terror of never knowing when one of those missiles or bombs might hit you, when you might be collateral damage. The blast radius of these this weaponry used in Tehran is absolutely astounding, as we've seen by those massive fireballs caused by the attack on the gas depots there. So, yeah, there is a vast difference, but still, obviously, people in Tel Aviv living in constant terror, constantly rushing to the bomb shelters, Major.
Always appreciate all of your reporting and all of your perspective. Matt Gutman, thank you so much. I also spoke with Secretary Hegseth about whether there are U.S. troops on the ground in any means and where this operation going on right now, stands.
The Speaker of the House said late this week, the mission is, and I'm quoting him directly here, nearly accomplished by all estimates. Is that true?
We're very much on track, on plan. I was down at CENTCOM
Someone might hear that and think it's almost over.
Well, we're not flying a mission accomplished banner like George W. Bush on an aircraft carrier. We're not doing that, and we haven't done that. But we can be clear with the American people that this is not a fair fight, and that's on purpose. Our capabilities are overwhelming compared to what Iran's are. And frankly, when you combine our Air Force with the Air Force of the Israeli Defense Forces, it's the two most powerful air forces in the world. The ability for us to be up over the top and hunting with more conventional munitions, gravity bombs, 500-pound, 1,000-pound, 2,000-pound bombs on military targets, that we haven't even really begun to start that effort of the campaign, which is going to showcase even more how we will execute on those objectives.
The president said recently there will be no deal with Iran except unconditional surrender. What does that look like, unconditional surrender? How will you know it's real?
It means we're fighting to win. It means we set the terms. We'll know when they're not capable of fighting. There'll be a point where they'll have no choice but to do that. Whether they know it or not, they will be combat ineffective. They will surrender.
Typically, the understanding of a surrender is person to person. Is that what would be required in a matter like this?
Well, there's a lot of different ways. Whether they want to admit it or not, whether their pride lets them say it out loud or not, it's President Trump who will set the terms of that.
Despite the administration's claim that it obliterated Iran's nuclear infrastructure in June, international monitors estimate that Iran still has more than 970 pounds of nearly bomb-grade uranium.
Is it possible to achieve the objectives President Trump has set before you if we don't locate and obtain and extract the highly enriched uranium?
There's a lot of different ways we can get after that. They've used a conventional umbrella of missiles that was growing every single day, their production capacity, to try to cover over their nuclear blackmail ambitions. As far as how you get at that nuclear option, we'll make sure that their nuclear ambitions are never achieved.
Will we take it out ourselves?
Well, I would never tell you or anybody else what our options are. See, that's another thing. People keep asking.
It's a legitimate question.
It's a very fair question. People ask boots on the ground, no boots on the ground, 4 weeks, 2 weeks, 6 weeks, go in, go in. President Trump knows, I know, you don't tell the enemy, you don't tell the press, you don't tell anybody what your limits would be on an operation. We're willing to go as far as we need to in order to be successful.
Do we have any overt or covert forces inside Iran now?
I wouldn't tell you that if we did.
The only reason I ask is earlier this week you said no. Is that still the answer?
Yeah, that's still the answer, but we reserve the right. We would be completely unwise if we did not reserve the right to take any particular option, whether it included boots on the ground or no boots on the ground.
CBS News contributor and former CIA officer Elliot Ackerman joins me now. I'm always happy to have you with us, Elliot. You listen to an interview like that differently than I do. You have different experiences. You have a different mindset about what you're hearing. What struck you, if anything, about my conversation, some 30 minutes with the defense secretary?
Well, I think one thing that struck me is this conflation that if we only drop enough bombs on Iran or only lethal enough, that will bring about the conditions for an unconventional surrender. You know, if we look at the history of American wars, whether it's, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, the challenge wasn't that we didn't have enough military capability or weren't lethal enough. The challenge was a political challenge, that our military tools couldn't affect the type of political conditions that would allow us to declare victory in those wars. And thus far, I think the political outcome that will allow the United States to declare victory hasn't been articulated by this administration.
What I heard frequently, Elliot, was the defense secretary telling me what this conflict isn't. It's not Iraq. It's not Afghanistan. What I yearn to hear more of and what is.
I couldn't agree with you more, Major. I think not only do I yearn to hear that, I think as the longer this goes on and the more it costs in blood and treasure, the American people are going to demand to know what it is, particularly if there is talk of U.S. boots on the ground.
And are you operationally, as you think about this, Elliot, in agreement with lots of people who are much smarter about this than I am, who say if you are going, as the U.S. intends to dramatically end or frustrate for years and years and years Iran's pursuit of nuclear weapons, you have to get the highly enriched uranium out. Is that something you believe is true?
I think that's absolutely true, particularly if we have conditions on the ground inside of Iran where the regime continues to cling to power, or even if you have something that metastasizes as a type of civil war in Iran. But we can't have that weapons-grade uranium loose in Iran. It's too much of a liability for the United States and the region.
And of course, Israel would be as concerned about that as we are, and they might jointly or independently also have means or motives to try to pursue it. What do you make, if anything, Elliot, of this announcement of a new supreme leader, one of the sons of the slain Ayatollah Ali Khamenei?
Well, I think there was, a hope early on in the initial salvos of this campaign that perhaps the regime could topple quickly, that you might see a resumption of protests like we saw in January, and the Iranian people, making good on what the administration has called this generational opportunity. The more time that passes from the initiation of this campaign, the more it seems unlikely that you're going to have that type of a popular uprising, to include the announcement of a new supreme leader. So it seems that the regime is dug in, and this conflict seems as though it's going to go on and on.
Elliot Ackerman, always a pleasure, sir. Thank you very much. CBS News Chief Washington Analyst Robert Costa joins me now. Robert, you talked to the president over the weekend. What did he tell you? And what are your sources around the president telling you about his current and the administration's current mindset?
Major, great to be with you. My conversation with President Trump on Saturday was very much in line with what our colleague Wei Zhejiang heard from President Trump today. He was very confident about the strategy and policy so far. He was reiterating to me that his view of the damage done to the Iranian military, its Navy, its Air Force was extensive, and he felt the U.S. and Israel were on very good footing, to the point where they do not even need the help of U.S. allies at this point. He's already rebuked the United Kingdom and its offer of sending aircraft carriers to the region.
And that confidence, did it sound, you've talked to Donald Trump before he was a political figure, you've talked to him as a president, you talked to him in his in-between time. Did that confidence resonate in that deeply held Trumpian way, or did it feel any way to you as if it was a placeholder?
His confidence is something I've seen before from him during times of crisis, or at least high tension. He is someone who likes to say he doesn't like when others are playing games. He doesn't respond to pressure. And what's notable about President Trump as a person I've covered for over 15 years is he doesn't approach things, and this is so well known, but it's really often forgotten. He doesn't approach things with the same norms and values as others when it comes to these types of situations. He doesn't reflect on some kind of perhaps internal debate inside of the administration or all of these different options. He's very much about projecting strength, leaning into his decision once he makes it, and allowing things to play out without reacting in real time in some kind of sporadic way.
And the president said very recently that high gas prices would be a small price to pay if, in fact, the United States and the world could obtain peace and safety with a new regime and a new approach in Iran. Based on your reporting, not so much at the White House, but among other Republicans, is that becoming a concern? Gas prices, potential inflationary impacts, downstream effects of this war?
It's a concern to a point privately, as many members are facing re-election. But what's notable today is that President Trump, before he has his press conference in a few minutes, he's been meeting with congressional Republicans and congressional leaders. They couldn't stop applauding him. He's projecting strength. They like that he's projecting strength, they tell me, behind the scenes. They want to see that this war is moving toward a conclusion, but trust him ultimately to come up with the final timeline for how this all plays out. And he knows that congressional Republicans are uneasy, but I don't see an anti-war contingent forming. There's those in the House, Democrats and some Republicans like Congressman Thomas Massie of Kentucky, who would like to see Congress more involved in the authorization of force. But wholesale, Republicans are pretty much with the president on almost everything. He has reimagined the party in his image, as you know, for over a decade now.
Robert Costa, I appreciate it very much. I see Wei Zhejiang right here on the set with me, and that is a great thing, because I have often told you, ladies and gentlemen, when we have things that are new, really new, we interrupt our flow and bring those new things to you in the moment. And you have new things, Ouija.
We have new things.
Tell our audience what our new things are.
Well, Robert so deftly, connected our new things with his reporting because they really track. And
You talked to the president.
I did talk to the president, bearing the lead.
What, 2 hours ago, right?
Yes. As Robert also knows very well, and you know too, sometimes, he's in a chatty mood and you can just call him up. And he wanted to talk about the timeline of the war and how he views the progress so far.
And what did he tell you?
I asked him what percentage of the war he thought was complete, because
Excellent
you'll remember
question.
that when he first launched the strikes, he estimated that it was going to last for 4 to 5 weeks.
I remember
So how can we understand the way he's thinking about how much is left to do? And he said that he thought the war was very much complete, and went on to talk about how he felt like Iran basically militarily doesn't have anything left. So he said that the U.S. is actually way ahead of the initial timeline he laid out, 4 to 5 weeks. So I pressed him, I said, it sounds like the war could wrap up soon. And that's when he said, I don't know, it depends. And wrapping up the war is in my mind and nobody else's. But clearly it's something he's thinking about. I think today the markets and the oil prices were a real driving force for President Trump and a red flag for him to factor that in. Obviously, he's laid out many other things, Major, but this president cares a lot about those two things.
It sounds as if we could put some things together. When I asked the defense secretary, Pete Hegseth, about what the Speaker of the House said, nearly over, nearly accomplished, he didn't embrace that. The president is not directly embraced it, but what the president said and what the defense secretary said matches up in this respect. President Trump will decide by himself when this is over. Yes. Whether the surrender is sufficient to his unconditional standards or anyone else's or history's definition of an unconditional surrender, he's going to end this when he wants to end it. And that is consistent with what I think you just told me you heard.
He wants to end U.S. involvement when he wants to end it, but when the actual war ends is not only up to the president to decide, but it does sound like he is ready to start thinking about how America will end its role in this war. Although I will say, Major, right now he is making live remarks. He is presumably taking questions. He scheduled a news conference,
right.
But he already said that we have won the war against Iran. We just haven't won enough. So again, he's leaving some doors open for himself in case that this is prolonged. But there's one more thing, Major, that that we did talk about, a couple of things. But one thing that really stands out to me is we talked about the supreme leader that he has vocally disapproved of. And he has said, in order for this war to end, I have to be involved in whoever's next in leading the war. And he said he does not approve of Khamenei.
Right,
who is
Mustafa Khamenei,
correct.
who Matt Gutman just talked to us about.
Exactly, he said.
So he wasn't involved, does not approve.
Does not approve. I said, well, what are you going to do about that? And he said, I have no intention of telling you. He also said, I asked him if he had someone else in mind. And he said, yes, I do. But obviously wouldn't name who that is, or if they had spoken to each other. But this is the reason why it matters, Major, is because he has indicated that if he is not on board with what's happening in Iran's next chapter, that this conflict can't end. But as of right now,
and that becomes a very, very sticky regime change wicket.
Exactly. And he's backed himself into that because he's put it in writing.
These are his words.
He's talked about it. These are his words. Yeah. And they could change, but that is something that is quite important to him.
But that's what you heard from the president directly not 2 hours ago. Ouija Jang.
That's correct.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Major.
We are going to take a quick break. Please stay with us. You're watching The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. Authorities said today the suspects in an attempted attack outside the residence of New York Mayor Zohran Mamdani were inspired, that's a quote, by ISIS. 2 men face terrorism charges, federal terrorism charges, and the allegation is they tried to detonate some homemade explosive devices or things that were potentially explosive devices while protests were going on Saturday. New York City Police Commissioner Jessica Tisch said any connection to ISIS should be taken seriously. Let's listen.
There should be no confusion about what ISIS constitutes. It is a designated foreign terrorist organization responsible for deadly terrorist attacks across the globe.
Our Jerika Duncan is following all this and joins us outside, I believe, Gracie Mansion in New York City. Jerika, what's the latest?
Well, the latest, as you just mentioned, is that the police are saying this was ISIS-inspired, and they were, because of statements they said both of those suspects made. They're facing federal charges that include use of a weapon of mass destruction. They're due back in court April 8th. They have not been officially indicted, but these are the initial charges. Authorities say that they are taking this very seriously, specifically because of the element that was used inside of that alleged explosive device, TATP, which investigators say is material that is highly volatile and used in multiple terror attacks. What's so interesting about all of this, too, Major, is the age of these men, 18 and 19 years old. Police say they came over here from Pennsylvania, weren't necessarily affiliated with either protest, but wanted to do something, some type of destruction to the people who were here. One of the suspects telling police that he, quote, wanted to carry out something similar to the Boston bombing, in fact, bigger than the Boston bombing, where he told officials because only 3 people died. Kayumi, the other suspect, telling officials that he did look at ISIS-inspired videos on his phone, and one of the deputy commissioners saying that that is something they're seeing more of, younger people being radicalized through social media. Again, though, they pleaded not guilty to these 5 federal charges. More to come. Again, they're expected to be back in court in April. Major.
And Jerika, that reference to Boston, that's the Boston Marathon bombing. And just help the audience, because they might not have been read in on this. What was going on Saturday? There was one protest and a counter-protest. And then, as I understand what the police and the federal authorities said today, they sort of jumped or arrived in the midst of those protests, and that's when they launched this alleged attack.
Exactly. So right here where I'm standing, this is the east side of New York. Gracie Mansion is behind me. That is the official residence of Zohran Mamdani. Officials said that they knew for a few days that there was going to be an anti-Muslim protest, and then there was a counter to that protest. So you have these 2 groups sort of going at it, and then these 2 gentlemen come along out of nowhere, and they try and lodge these explosive devices. One of them was actually lit, and what you can see in some of the video and also the still pictures that the police have released is that 2 police officers jumped right in. They ran toward the danger and quickly arrested these 2 suspects. We expect to possibly hear from those 2 officers tomorrow, we're told, but the commissioner, Jessica Tisch, here giving them all the credit. And then again, reminding people that New York City, because of the heightened state that they are already in because of the conflict in Iran, are very well prepared, she says, to handle these types of things.
And ran toward the danger, not knowing exactly what that danger could be. That was worth remembering and is worth remembering. Jerika Duncan, with all the details, I thank you very, very much. Still to come, the economic costs so far of the war with Iran. Oil prices soar globally past $100 per barrel. The president downplays right now pain at the pump. More on all this when we come back. You're watching The Takeout. The average price of a gallon of gas in the United States is up 17% since the war with Iran started. According to AAA, a gallon of regular will now cost you, on average, almost $3.50. Last week, on average, it's only $3, which is close to where things were a year ago. One of our absolute favorite guests, Justin Wolfers, joins us now. Professor of Public Policy and Economics at the University of Michigan and a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution. Justin, I'm always glad to have you with us. Just do the economics of the week that was.
Mate, the week that was the story of Iran. And I think what people need to understand is there's 2 stories about Iran, and the American media is only focusing at the moment on one of them. The first of them, the one we are focusing on, is what's going on with oil prices. A rough rule of thumb is that every time oil prices go up 10%, your price at the pump goes up 10%. Well, right now, oil prices are up about 40%. And so that suggests we might be looking at something close to $4 a gallon if things don't change, but things are changing really quickly. Look, so far, as I said, in the US, we've been talking about this as an oil story. But the second thing to realize is this isn't just an oil story, it's a war story. We have lots of evidence from past wars that administrations almost always understate the costs and overstate their ability to get in and out of a mission quickly and easily. And the economic costs often turn out to be much larger and very, very different than what people imagined. And so I think that's got to be weighing very heavily on people's minds right now.
When the president says it would be worth absorbing short-term pain, meaning higher gas prices, to achieve long-term goals in Iran, does that suggest to you, Justin, that this could be ended rather soon? And if it is ended rather soon, meaning the United States stops what it's doing, things could return in relatively quick order to where they were, let's say 2 weeks ago?
Yeah, let me do the classic economist and give you on the one hand and on the other.
There you
and I
go.
apologize for that, but that's the only way to be honest right now. Here's on the one hand. The president at a press conference, in a press interview today, looked like he was more or less declaring victory. By the way, the president's rhetoric and reality are two very different creatures. But if he were to declare victory, he packs up, goes home, it's a very short war. You beauty, life can get back somewhat to normal. It'll never get all the way back to normal. The rest of the world will remember what happened. People will have to plan their businesses, understanding that at any given moment, the president could start a new adventure. That adventure could disrupt the world, disrupt international relations, and disrupt their business. So that's the look, this could be over fast and you think story. Let me tell you the other. It's history. History tells us that almost every time the US has gone into war, it is dramatically underestimated how difficult it is to win and how long it will take. Let me remind you, just in the early days of the Iraq War, Donald Rumsfeld famously said, we might be there 5 days, could be 5 weeks. I doubt it will be 5 months. And it turned out to be much, much longer than 5 years. So when someone says on the one hand it could be measured in days and the reality is in years, that says they underestimated it by a factor of 365. If you want to think about that, just think about when someone in Washington tells you the cost that this war could impose, realize that multiplying that number by 365 remains a possibility.
Justin Wolfers, I always appreciate your time and your expertise, sir. Thank you so much.
Great pleasure, mate.
A shutdown could be coming to, of all places, the Oval Office, meaning a legislative shutdown. There's a threat from the president as he pushes senators, Republican senators specifically, to pass a new voting piece of legislation that would create new requirements. More on that when we come back. You're watching The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. Over the weekend, President Trump said he will not sign any other piece of legislation until the Senate passes what's called the Save America Act, which would place some new requirements across the country on voting. Congressional reporter Torian Small joins me now from Capitol Hill. Torian, let me play for you something the president just said as he was wrapping up his prepared remarks to House Republicans in Doral, Florida. Please, let's listen.
No. It'll guarantee the midterms. It'll guarantee the midterms. If you don't get it, big trouble, my opinion.
That's reference to the legislation, meaning what the president is saying is if this piece of legislation is passed, Republicans are guaranteed to win the midterms, which is not true. He doesn't know. And he also implied that if it doesn't pass, Democrats will continue to cheat. And I've said this before, I will say it every time the president asserts this. It is false. The statistical probability and the statistical reality of non-citizens voting in federal elections is beyond minuscule. And there are academic studies, stacked on academic studies, that confirm this. Torian, pick it up from there.
Yeah, I just want to point out also what the president is advocating for is a bit further beyond what the House passed. That SAVE Act didn't include what he's calling for now, which is also restrictions on mail-in voting. That means that even though House Republicans did get it across the finish line from their chamber, they'll have to go back to the drawing board to rewrite that bill and pass it all over again before they could send it over to the Senate. There have been quite a bit of stalling on the Senate side because of procedurally, it's not as simple as just a simple majority as it is in that chamber. Leader Thune has been pretty vocal on his trepidation around changing the existing rules, including implementing what's known as the talking filibuster, which is what the president has been pushing for. But even if he did, that still doesn't guarantee that they can get it across the finish line, Major, because, as we know, the Senate is a bit more complicated, and some of those procedures could spell disaster moving forward for their chances at pushing back against opposition from Democrats.
Right. The president is picking a fight with Senate Republicans over this. And to your point, Torian, and I'm really glad you brought that up, if you make these changes to early voting, you are changing a procedure that Republicans continue to try to embrace and use to their advantage, even though the president continues to throw shade on it. Torian Small from Capitol Hill, I appreciate you very much. That does it for today. You can catch tonight's episode of The Takeout and previous episodes on YouTube, Paramount Plus, your favorite social media platform, and CBSNews.com. The Takeout's also available, we're happy to remind, as a podcast. The CBS News Roundup is next.